All right, Exodus chapter 1. Exodus chapter 1, the whole chapter. We're back to doing chapters at a time, but that's okay. Exodus chapter 1. The title of the message today is Prevailing Purposes. Prevailing Purposes. In parts of Asia, farmers plant the bamboo tree and water it faithfully for an entire year and see absolutely nothing. What about in the second year? You ever tried to grow bamboo? What about the second year? You know what you get? Nothing. The third year? Nothing. 4 years? Nothing. For 4 years they water and tend the soil without a single green shoot breaking through the surface. But then in year 5, the bamboo suddenly shoots up over 80 feet in just 6 years. Well, there's a lot going on underneath that soil for a long time before you see anything of result. The truth is that bamboo had been growing all along, just underground, developing roots strong enough to support its towering height. It's almost like it knew something that we didn't. It needed to develop some roots. It needed to develop something beneath the soil for a long time before it could ever grow up into the height that it's expected to grow. For centuries, Israel has been in Egypt. Now, we're jumping right into the book of Exodus. You know, we missed a whole book of the Bible called Genesis. Did everybody know that it was Genesis? Just nod your head yes. It was Genesis, so we missed the whole book of Genesis. And there's almost something going on in Genesis, a few things. There's a few stories in Genesis. But we saw in the book of Genesis the start of the nation of Israel. With Father Abraham and Sarah, and they start to have, they have Isaac, and then Isaac has Jacob and Esau, and then Jacob's the one who perpetuates the line, and he's got some kids. He has 12 kids with like 4 different women. You can read about all that scandalous stuff in the book of Genesis. However, in the lifetime of Joseph, who's one of those 12, there's a famine in the land. Do you remember this in the story of Joseph? There's a famine in the land. And where do they go to seek refuge since there's famine in the land? Who has the food? Egypt does. Yeah, with Joseph. Joseph has saved food in Egypt. And so he says to his brothers and his whole family, there's like 70 or 72 of them, depending upon which account you read, let's go down to Egypt where there's food and we'll stay there for a while. And this is where we start in the book of Exodus. They've been there for centuries now. Do you suppose they were supposed to stay there for centuries? You can ask God that yourself one day. But for centuries, Israel has been in Egypt. It might have looked like slow, stagnant growth, but God was growing them into a mighty nation just beneath the surface, kind of like our bamboo tree. As we start into chapter 1, we will see that Egypt is starting to notice this nation beginning to rise up from beneath the surface, and they decide that they need to, quote-unquote, do something about it. However, our God is able to have his purposes prevail in spite of all of those odds. The title of the message is Prevailing Purposes. What is God able to do with this little nation of Israel down in Egypt? Today, God wants you to see that his purposes will prevail. And we're going to see this in 3 ways as we get through Exodus chapter 1. The first way that we will see his purposes prevail is verses 1 through 7. His purposes prevail in the proliferation of Israel. How many did I lose there? Proliferation. Growing. I needed a P word. So you know what these are all going to be now, don't you? Verses 8 through 14, the second way that we see his purposes prevail. His purposes prevail in the persecution of Israel. And the third way that we see his purposes prevail, verses 15 through 22, his purposes prevail in the prosperity of Israel. The proliferation, persecution, and prosperity of Israel. Exodus chapter 1. Let's crack this one open. Let's read verses 1 through 7. Now these are the names of the children of Israel who came into Egypt, each man with his household come with Jacob. Reuben, Simeon, Levi, and Judah, Issachar, Zebulun, and Benjamin, Dan, Naphtali, Gad, and Asher. All those who were descendants of Jacob were 70 persons, for Joseph was in Egypt already. And Joseph died, all his brothers, and all that generation. But the children of Israel were fruitful and increased abundantly, multiplied and grew exceedingly mighty, and the land was filled with them. Where was the promised land? Pop quiz time. Where was the promised land? Much closer to the land where we now know as Israel, not Egypt. They were not supposed to be in Egypt. They were supposed to be in the promised land given to Abraham way back when in the book of Genesis. But here we find for centuries the nation of Israel in the land of Egypt, in the land of Goshen, in the land of Egypt, for my trivia buffs. So they are spent there for centuries. They're not surrounded by familiarity. They're not where they're supposed to be. They're kind of out of place. They're kind of disjointed in that way. You ever end up in some place where you just don't feel like you belong? Maybe you start a new job or a new position and you're like, I'm like a fish out of water in this place. I am not meant to be here. This is not where I'm supposed to be. This doesn't feel right. I don't know anybody else here. This is kind of icky. I just want to go back home. This just doesn't for me. And this is what I imagine that the children of Israel for 400 years were like in the land of Egypt. This isn't their homeland. This isn't where their brethren are. Sure, there's this group of them and they kind of stick to themselves in the land of Goshen in Egypt, but really they're still in Egypt. This isn't where they're supposed to be. Sometimes we may find ourselves in unfamiliar or hostile situations, but God is still in control. He's still in control, even though they're not where they're supposed to be, even though they're in an unfamiliar land, and even if it's for over 400 years. God is in control of this entire situation. He's in control of where they're at and why they're there, and He's allowing this to happen. Just like our bamboo shoot that takes years and years and years underneath the surface to grow, to stabilize, to be ready, because then when it comes up out of the surface, man, it's going to grow tall and it's going to grow fast. And that's exactly what was happening to the children of Israel. The 70 that went down there originally have mushroomed. I mean, I don't think verse 7 could be any more clear just how popular they have become. They were fruitful, they increased abundantly, multiplied, grew exceedingly and mighty, and the land was filled with them. How many more adjectives does Moses have to give you for you to understand that there were tons of them? Over the course of 400 years, there were tons of them. And you might ask yourself, well, how many is tons? This is the number that I have in my mind, because we're told at another time that in the Exodus there were about 600,000 fighting men. And if each man had a wife, that's 1.2 million. And if each couple had 2 kids, there's another 1.2 million. So we're talking over 2 million of them. Is that accurate? I don't know. But we do know that 600,000 fighting men were there. That's what it does say. And they probably had families, so it's way more than 600,000. That's a lot of people. And I can see how the Pharaoh might start to get a little nervous about that. But you know what? God's purposes are going to prevail. Even when it doesn't seem like it's going to, even when it feels like it's not the right way, God's purposes will prevail in the hearts and lives of His people. Secondly, the second way we see His purposes prevail, verses 8 through 14, His purposes prevail in the persecution of Israel. And it goes something like this. Now there arose a new king over Egypt who did not know Joseph. And he said to his people, look, the people of the children of Israel are more and mightier than we. Come, let us deal shrewdly with them, lest they multiply. And it happened in the event of war that they also join our enemies and fight against us, and so go up out of the land. Therefore, they set taskmasters over them to afflict them with their burdens. And they built for Pharaoh supply cities, Pithom, and Ramses. But the more they afflicted them, the more they multiplied and grew, and they were in dread of the children of Israel. So the Egyptians made the children of Israel serve with rigor, and they made their lives bitter with hard bondage in mortar and brick, and in all manner of service in the field. All their service with which they made them serve was with rigor. God's purposes prevail in the persecution of Israel. Opposition and suffering do not cancel out God's plan. Rather, it deepens our dependence. So what starts to happen here? So we see in verse number 8, there arose a new king over Egypt who did not know Joseph. Now, there's some speculation as to who this Pharaoh might be and what his title was, and there's a lot of speculation. At the end of the day, the Bible doesn't tell us, and I wonder if that's on purpose. Sometimes I think God's a much more purposeful God than we give him credit for. It might have been on purpose that he let them be in Egypt for 400 years. It might be on purpose that he doesn't tell us who this Pharaoh is. But the point is, he's trying to get you to see something else other than who the Pharaoh was. The point is that there was a new Pharaoh that rose up who did not know Joseph. Now, what does that mean? You ever been at a workplace? Maybe you're the one at the workplace and you are really good friends with the big boss. And as a result of being friends with the big boss, you get a great schedule, there's been regular pay raises, all the employees get along really well, and you kind of hold the tide for everything, and everything just goes really, really smooth and really, really nice. And one day a new boss comes in, for whatever reason. Maybe the previous one died, maybe he got transferred, whatever. Maybe he quit, maybe he retired. But a new boss comes in. You think that schedule's going to be as awesome? Do you think the pay raises are going to come along as nicely? Do you think everybody's going to get along as well? You know what happens when a new big boss comes in that doesn't have the same relationship with everybody that the previous one did? Things can go south, things can go sour really quickly. And a new Pharaoh came into the land, and he did not know Joseph. It seems to me that the previous pharaohs had known Joseph. I mean, Joseph was number 2 in the land while he himself was alive. He was the man, really. He's the one who orchestrated the storage of the grain in the time of the famine. We can read about that in Genesis. Joseph did some awesome work for Egypt. And that legacy probably endured for a really long time. Until one day, there arose a new king over Egypt who did not know Joseph, who didn't give his family the same benefit of the doubt. This king didn't really quite appreciate the family of Joseph like the previous kings had. And he's going to see them in a different light. He's going to do something different with them. He's going to deal differently with them. In fact, he's going to see them as more of an opponent than an ally. I wonder if for 400 years these other pharaohs had seen the nation of Israel rise and think, we just have some good help here. But after 400 years, there's potentially 2 million of them. And this new king that arises says, let us deal shrewdly with them. They're becoming more and mightier than us. Maybe they might continue to multiply. And in the event of war, they're going to join our adversary. And he sees all of the potential problems. I'm glad that we're not the kind of people that all we see are potential problems. You know anybody that all they see are potential problems? Yeah, but we could do this and it'd be really great. Yeah, but did you think about this? And it could go south here and it could be really bad there. And you just have somebody that just sees all the potential problems. This is what this guy is like. He's just seeing all the potential problems. He could have 2 million people, the nation of Israel, helping him out with a million different things. And it could be really great, a good beneficial thing for both sides. But he says, no. I'm just going to look at the problems. I'm just going to see all the negative. And we need to do something about this. Therefore, they set taskmasters over them to afflict them with burdens. He's going to make the work much more difficult for them. They'd already been working, and it was a situation that had already been arranged probably for some time now. But in an effort to make their lives more miserable, to get them to not reproduce, to not have more babies, to do something different, maybe to show them who's the boss. You know, sometimes you got to show people who's the boss. Show them who's really in control here. He's going to afflict them. He's going to make their lives more difficult, much more complicated. He's going to make the work harder. And it's just going to get harder and harder and harder for them. So the Egyptians made the children of Israel serve with rigor. It's going to be way more challenging, way more difficult. You ever have somebody come in and just make your life miserable? Well, I'm glad nobody's ever had somebody made their life miserable, because that's fantastic, because it really sucks, guys. When somebody comes in and just makes your life just miserable. And that's what Pharaoh tried to do to these people. He wanted their lives to be absolutely miserable. Did he succeed? Did he get them to stop reproducing? Did he get them to stop having kids? Was his plan a success? Or did he find that these people had much more fortitude than he gave them credit for? God's people are able to endure even the most harshest of punishments and persecutions that can be thrown at them. I love seeing stories and reading stories about how God's people are able to stand up and to endure hardship and challenging times because of the bedrock foundation that we have in the Lord Jesus Christ. How do you get through tough times? When things don't go your way and the car breaks down and you go on vacation and you come home and your dryer's broke and all these sorts of things happen. You never notice they all happen all at once too, by the way. It's not just one thing at a time. It's the siding comes off and the dryer's broke and the dishwasher doesn't work and the car's breaking down. It's always everything all at the same time. It's never just one thing at a time. You're like, Lord, just give me one thing. I could handle one thing at a time. But Lord, you got to give it to me like 6 things at once. It's almost as if he wants you to go, Lord, I need your help. Because I can't do 6 things at once. Because if it was one thing at a time, you'd think you could handle it. It's almost like he wants you to depend upon him. So he's gonna wallop you really hard. And he's going to wallop these guys really hard through the Egyptians. Now, why does he do that? God is doing a work in the life of these people to get them to do something very specific. Now, I'm letting the cat out of the bag a little bit here, but I want to give you some context as to where this is going and why this is happening. For over 400 years, these guys have just been really safe and secure in the land of Egypt, and they really never gave two thoughts about why they were there or if they should ever go back to the promised land. They were just content to just sit there. But where does God want them to be? He wants them to be in the promised land. He wants them to be doing what he wants them to be doing. But they're content to just hang out in Egypt for 400 years. Do you ever get so complacent in life that you stop doing what it is that God wants you to do? You become so complacent, you become so carefree and relaxed, and you just stop thinking about what was my original intent? What did God actually want me to do in the beginning? When I first started going to college, what did God want me to do? When I first started doing this, what did God want me to actually be doing with that? When he separated Abraham out, he wanted him to be the father of many people, father of a nation in the promised land. And for 400 some years, these guys have just been content to be in Egypt. How does God get a group of people that size to go back into the promised land? He's God. He could snap his fingers and teleport them right over there. I know he could do that. But how does he practically get these folks to get up and leave this place when they are obviously so well ensconced and comfortable there in Egypt? Sometimes when you're too comfortable and God's got to come alongside and go, pow, he's trying to get you to do something that he wants you to do. So he's going to use the Egyptians to muster up this nation and to get them to leave that nation, Egypt. It might not be easy for them. It might not be the easiest thing they've ever been through. But it's what God has got to do to get them to get up off their keisters and to leave the land of Egypt in a migration that we know as the Exodus. And it starts here with the taskmastering of the Israelites by the hand of the Egyptians, because he's trying to get them to become uncomfortable in a very comfortable position. How many of you are a little too comfortable in life right now? Sometimes when we're the most comfortable, that's when God is going to strike the hottest. We're never really meant to be all that comfortable. We're supposed to be doing stuff for God, and that takes faith. And that's usually outside of our comfort zone. And so if you are comfortable, that means you're not outside your comfort zone, which tells me a lot about how much faith you're using in your daily life. Answer, very close to 0. And without faith, it seems like we just read a book that said without faith it is impossible to please God. What was that book? Oh, that's right, it was Hebrews. He's going to make these people who are very comfortable very uncomfortable. And sometimes we say, oh, God's just a mean God of the Old Testament. He's just such a meanie. Why in the world would he put taskmasters over these guys? I thought he was supposed to love them and take care of them, and he's supposed to be their shepherd, and on and on and on it goes. And we think God of the Old Testament is just such a bad, mean God. You ever hear somebody say stuff like that? And the God of the New Testament is love, found in Jesus. And the God of the Old Testament is a mean, wrathful God. No, he's not. He's dealing with a group of stiff-necked people who've become too comfortable, and he's got to make them uncomfortable. So what's he going to do? He's got to get them out of there. So he's going to do what he has to do. Why? Because he loves them. Sometimes you do with your kids things that aren't exactly comfortable for them, but you're trying to do something for them so that they can do what it is you want them to do. And that might mean that they become uncomfortable. It's okay. They'll survive. His purposes prevail in the proliferation of Israel. They're going to grow and multiply no matter where they're at. His purposes prevail in the persecution of Israel in spite of all of the taskmastering that the Egyptians gave them. What does it say that happens to them? They continue to grow and multiply in spite of all the rigor. But his purposes prevail in the prosperity of Israel. Verses 15 through 22. Then the king of Egypt spoke to the Hebrew midwives. We're going to change up our course of action here. The king of Egypt spoke to the Hebrew midwives, of whom the name of one was Shiphrah, and the other name was Puah. Did I get Shiphrah correct? Anybody? Did I get that correct? Thank you for saying yes. And he said, when you do the duties of a midwife for the Hebrew women and see them on the birth stools, if it is a son, you shall kill him. If it is a daughter, then she shall live. But the midwives feared God and did not do as the king of Egypt commanded them, but saved the male children alive. So the king of Egypt called for the midwives and said to them, why have you done this thing and saved the male children alive? And the midwives said to Pharaoh, because the Hebrew women are not like the Egyptian women, for they are lively and give birth before the midwives come to them. Therefore God dealt well with the midwives, and the people multiplied and grew very mighty. So it was because the midwives feared God that he provided households for them. So Pharaoh commanded all his people, saying, every son who is born you shall cast into the river, and every daughter you shall save alive. His purposes prevail in the prosperity of Israel. So this is now the second phase of the king of Egypt, Pharaoh, his plan to knock down Israel a couple of pegs in his mind. The first one was to make their lives miserable by giving them way more work than they deserved. Number 2, better idea. How about when the midwives are helping the Israelite women give birth, if you birth a son, you kill the son. That'll do it. That'll take their population way down, won't it? That'll do it. Good idea, Pharaoh. Boy, he's pretty smart, isn't he? He thought he had it all figured out. What did he not take into consideration when he came up with this brilliant idea? That the midwives were going to not play along. The midwives feared God more than they feared the Pharaoh. We are called to fear God and not man. And these midwives showed incredible courage. You ever want some good stories about women in the Bible? Here you go. This is a fantastic story about women in the Bible doing an incredibly heroic and courageous act right in the face of Pharaoh, who already didn't like them. You know, we struggle as people in our workplace to say something when somebody tells a bad joke because we don't want to be seen as the outcast or the Jesus freak or the Bible thumper or end up with some cute nickname like that. So we tend to shy away from saying anything. We don't want to rock the boat. We don't want to upset the apple cart, so we're just going to play nice. You know, I'm really glad that these midwives at this time didn't want to upset the apple cart. I'm really glad that these midwives at this time had some courage and a backbone and did what was right in the sight of God and not man. We need to be the kinds of people who do not fear man or what man can do, but rather we fear God. You know why? Jesus tells us why we need to fear God rather than man. He says, "Do not fear man, who after he has killed the body can do no more. But rather fear him who after he has killed the body has the power to cast the soul into hell." This is why we fear God and not man. And these midwives understood this. Now, where did they get this understanding? How did they come to this point in their lives? We may never know, but that's okay. What I do know is that they had tremendous courage and conviction to stand for God in a time and in a place where it was wrong to stand for God. And these midwives feared God. They did not do as the king commanded them, and they saved the male children alive. And so the king of Egypt comes to them, and he starts to question them. What in the world are you gals doing? He's calling them out on the carpet here. And they come up. They are smarter than all get out. Did you catch what they told the king? These Israelite women, when they give birth, they're not like the Egyptian women. They have the babies before we even get there, and then it's too late. Now, I don't know if that's true or not. I'm going to guess that it's an excuse that they gave to the king. But you know what? What courage did it take to stand up to the king like that? And so God dealt with those midwives, and the people multiplied, and they grew mightily. And he provided households for them, because God is able to provide, and his purposes can prevail no matter what is going on all around us. The king could come by and say, I want you to do this, and I want it to be done this way. And if we know that God doesn't want it that way, do we have the backbone and the courage to say no? This is how this is supposed to be done. I'm not killing these babies. I don't care if you want me to. I don't care if you're afraid of them. I don't care if you're afraid of this population. I'm not killing the babies. It's not right. And God's purposes prevail in this nation of Israel has this start, this foundation. As we start the book of Exodus, you can start to see, we're in like the 6th year of the bamboo plan at this point, I think, because we're starting to see something coming up from beneath the surface, and God's purposes are prevailing. During World War II, a bomb destroyed a warehouse in England, and inside the warehouse were bags of seeds which had been stored for decades. After the explosion, some of those seeds were scattered into nearby fields, seeds that had been dormant for years. Surprisingly, when they landed in the soil, they sprouted and they grew. The destruction meant to ruin them actually released their potential. And this is how it works with God's people. What the enemy intends for harm often becomes the very thing God uses to fulfill his promises. Pharaoh's oppression of Israel didn't stop God's people. Rather, it served only to strengthen and embolden them as they continued to spread and to multiply. God's purposes couldn't be buried under centuries of slavery in Egypt, and neither can they be buried under the trials that you're facing either. God's purposes will always prevail. Let's pray.